Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're venturing into the 13th century Holy Roman Empire. We'll be exploring Malve von Hassell's historical fiction novel, The Falconer's Apprentice.
And for this journey, we've gathered quite a bit of material. We've got the book's descriptions from Amazon, both UK and US. A really interesting guest post from Adventures of a Tudor Nerd.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, insights from Goodreads, a review from the Historical Novel Society, and bits from the author's own website, too.
Okay, right. So our mission here is to really get under the skin of the story for you. We want to figure out, its core appeal, the historical world it brings to life, and maybe why it's clicked with so many readers.
So good.
All right, let's kick things off. Where does the story actually start? What's the incident that sets everything in motion?
Well, it begins pretty dramatically, actually. At Castle Kragenberg, you have Lord Ethelbert, who gets scratched by a young peregrine falcon, Adela.
Ouch. And he doesn't take it well, I assume.
Not at all. He orders the bird to be destroyed immediately.
Wow, just like that. But the main character, Andreas, he's the apprentice falconer, right? He's close to this falcon.
He is. It sounds like a really profound connection. So much so that Andreas makes this incredibly risky decision
Which is?
to smuggle Adela out of the castle, to save her life, basically.
Okay, that's a huge step for an apprentice, and this is all happening where exactly?
Castle Kragenberg. It's set in the German-speaking part of the Holy Roman Empire back in the 13th century. So think, a really vast, complex political landscape across Central Europe.
Right. And after saving the falcon, Andreas can't exactly stick around, can he?
No, staying becomes impossible.
Hmm.
He ends up hiding away in the cart of a man named Richard of Brugge.
Richard of Brugge.
Yeah.
An itinerant trader, the sources say, someone moving around, selling things.
Exactly. But, as we find out pretty quickly, Richard has his own secrets. A hidden mission, you might say.
Ah, intrigue. Okay, so this is where the journey really begins for Andreas.
It is. His escape with Richard takes him far, far away from Castle Kragenberg. They travel all the way from northern Germany, across, large parts of Frederick von Hohenstaufen's Holy Roman Empire.
Frederick II, right.
A major figure.
A very major and controversial figure. Their journey even takes them down into Italy.
So it's quite an epic trip. And I imagine it's more than just, sightseeing. The reviews seem to mention this journey is key to his development.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive coming-of-age element. As Andreas travels, he's seeing so much more of the world than he ever did in the castle.
He must be.
Yeah, and his focus starts to broaden. It's not just about falconry anymore. He starts observing the people, the places, and, importantly, the political tension that's simmering everywhere.
So he's learning about the world through direct experience.
Exactly. He internalizes the instability of the empire, which sort of mirrors his own precarious situation as an orphan on the run. It's a nice parallel how his personal growth connects to these bigger historical forces. So he's still working on his falconry, presumably, but also becoming more aware politically and personally, too. Some reviews mention self-discovery.
Definitely. He's learning to be observant, how to read situations, maybe be a bit more wary. It's a big shift from being a perhaps slightly naive, bullied orphan in the castle.
Right.
And yes, that inward journey is key. He starts figuring out what he actually wants, who he is, beyond just being a falconer's apprentice.
Let's talk more about the falconry itself. It's in the title, after all. How is it portrayed? What do the sources say?
Well, what's really interesting is the level of detail. The Historical Novel Society review, for instance, highlights how the book shows the social hierarchy reflected in falconry.
Oh, so?
Like certain birds were reserved for certain ranks, gerfalcons for kings and high nobility, apparently.
Okay.
Whereas someone lower down the social ladder, maybe a poor man, might fly goshawk or even a kestrel. It really embeds falconry into the social fabric.
That's fascinating. It shows it wasn't just a sport, but tied into status. And it sounds like the author, von Hassell, really researched this.
Oh, absolutely. That comes through loud and clear in the reviews. Goodreads reviewers repeatedly praise how accurately the practices are shown and how they're woven into the story, not just, info dumped.
Yeah, that's key in historical fiction.
And there was even one reviewer on Amazon US who identified themselves as a falconer,
Oh, wow.
who specifically praised the author's research and how well she captured that bond between a human and a raptor. Getting that kind of nod from an expert is pretty significant.
It really is. It suggests a deep understanding. Did the sources mention if Andreas' status affected his relationship with Adela, the peregrine? Peregrines were valuable, right?
They were highly valued, yes. While the sources don't explicitly say his lower status directly influenced the bond itself, the fact he, as an apprentice, connects so strongly with such a prized bird does highlight his natural talent.
Right, it sets him apart.
Exactly. And perhaps that skill, that connection with a high-status bird, maybe that even plays into why Lord Ethelbert reacts so harshly initially. Jealousy, maybe, or
Mhm.
just asserting dominance?
Interesting angle. Now, you mentioned Richard Brugge, the traitor, has his own secrets, and that Andreas learns about the political situation. Let's dive into that backdrop a bit more.
Okay. So Richard isn't just a traitor. His traveling gives him cover, allows him to gather information. He's actually a spy
A spy. For whom?
for the emperor himself, Frederick von Hohenstaufen, Frederick II. And the empire at this time is, well, it's rife with conflict. Political instability is everywhere.
So Andreas basically stumbles into this world of espionage and political maneuvering just by hiding in a cart.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
He gets a very immersive and probably quite dangerous education in the politics of the day.
And does this lead somewhere specific?
It does. Richard eventually reveals his true purpose to Andreas.
Uh,
There's a conspiracy underway, a plot to free Enzio.
Enzio, Frederick II's son, the one imprisoned in Bologna.
That's the one. His eldest illegitimate son, a capable commander in his own right, captured by his father's enemies and held prisoner. Freeing him would be a major coup.
So the stakes get incredibly high. And does the book explore the wider conflicts of the time too?
Yes, definitely. A Goodreads reviewer mentioned learning specifically about the clashes between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines.
The classic Pope versus Emperor factions.
Exactly those.
Yeah.
And also the ongoing struggle with the Lombard League, the northern Italian cities resisting Frederick's authority. So the personal story is happening right in the middle of these huge historical conflicts.
It sounds like a very rich historical tapestry. Let's shift back to Andreas himself. How does he change as a person through all this?
Well, you see a real transformation. He starts off, as we said, a bit vulnerable, an orphan, bullied, someone with very little control over his own life in the castle.
Right.
But the journey, the need to survive, the things he witnesses and learns,
Mm-hmm.
it forces him to become more self-reliant, more confident, maybe a bit hardened too, necessarily.
And his relationship with Richard must be crucial here.
Absolutely pivotal. Richard acts as a mentor. He teaches Andreas practical things, gives him advice, but maybe more importantly, he exposes him to the wider world, to different ways of thinking.
Like a father figure almost.
Perhaps, yeah, a mentor figure, certainly. The Adventures of a Tutor Nerd post actually pulled out a quote where Richard is explaining trade routes and the need for caution. Those kinds of moments are Andreas's real education.
And it's interesting, quite a few Goodreads reviewers pointed out they liked that there wasn't a forced romance plot.
Yes, the focus stays on other kinds of relationships. The mentorship with Richard, the bond with Adela the falcon. It allows for a different kind of character exploration, maybe a more nuanced one sometimes.
That makes sense. Okay, we keep coming back to the history. It seems like the historical accuracy is a really big selling point for this book.
It really does seem to be. Source after source Goodreads, the Historical Novel Society, that Tutor Nerd blog post, they all commend von Hassell's research. Meticulous is a word that comes up.
But it's not just dry facts, right? It feels lived in.
Exactly. The reviews stress how seamlessly the details are woven in. It brings the 13th century to life without feeling like you're reading a textbook. The Historical Novel Society review even mentions specific examples, like how medieval wounds were treated, cleaned, and stitched. Little details like that add authenticity.
Yeah, those specifics make a difference. And having a blog like Adventures of a Tutor Nerd feature the author suggests it's well regarded within that historical fiction community.
Right. It lends credibility among people who really care about getting the history right.
So, pulling all these threads together, the plot, the setting, Andreas's journey, what are the big themes you see emerging from the novel?
Well, freedom is definitely a major one. It's symbolized powerfully by Adela, the falcon, as one reviewer noted. But it's also Andreas's own quest for freedom and autonomy.
Makes sense. What else?
Identity is huge. Andreas figuring out who he is away from the castle. The pursuit of knowledge, both practical and political. Loyalty, who can you trust? And, of course, that fundamental bond between humans and animals.
And didn't you mention earlier he finds a new potential path for himself?
Yes, exactly. A Goodreads reviewer highlighted that during his travels, Andreas discovers he has a knack for healing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so the journey doesn't just broaden his horizons. It reveals hidden talents and maybe points him towards a different kind of future, a different way to contribute.
So, bringing it all together, what's the overall verdict from readers? How is the book received?
Overwhelmingly positive, it seems.
Yep.
You see consistently high ratings, like 4.3 stars on both Amazon and Goodreads, which is quite strong.
And what specific things do people praise?
The storytelling gets mentioned a lot, engaging, draws you in. The characters, especially Andreas's development, and as we've discussed, the historical accuracy and atmosphere.
Does it appeal to a particular age group?
It seems to have broad appeal, actually. Several Goodreads reviews say it works well for both young adults and adults. It hits that sweet spot, apparently. People call it easy to read, enjoyable, captivating.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive here. The Falconer's Apprentice sounds like it offers a really rewarding read.
Absolutely. It seems to be a captivating trip back to the 13th century.
Mhm.
You get the adventure, the coming-of-age story, that central bond between the boy and the falcon, all set against this really well-researched, turbulent historical backdrop, political intrigue, personal growth. It covers a lot.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How those challenges and choices people faced centuries ago, defying authority, adapting to huge changes, finding your own path, how those things still resonate with our own lives today. What part of Andreas' story might stick with you listening now? Is it his courage, his adaptability, that process of figuring himself out? Something to ponder.
Definitely. And if this has piqued your interest, you might want to check out Malve von Hassell's other books, titles like Alina, A Song for the Telling, or The Amber Crane are mentioned, or maybe just dive deeper into the history of Frederick II and the Holy Roman Empire. There's always so much more to discover there.